And now, switching hats. It's a huge, huge honor to introduce to you Dr. Barbara Love. One of our goals in this conference, our primary goal, is simply the question, what can we learn from each other? And in so doing, we structured the two keynotes as being the first one being how can the work that we're discussing here be helpful, and then tomorrow's keynote with Dr. James Thompson is how is this work also potentially harmful. This morning we get to hear about helpful. Dr. Barbara Love is a remarkable force in the field of conflict resolution and diversity training and social justice work, one of the pioneers of social justice work in the academy, having taught at UMass Amherst. Now I'm going to stay on script. Dr. Barbara Love, J. Love, is a speaker, presenter, consultant, and writer on multicultural organizational development. She is Professor Emerita of Social Justice Education at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She is a member of the National Training Laboratories NTL Institute and is a member of the National Black Women's Health Project. She has worked with a variety of organizations in North America, the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa on issues of diversity and inclusion. Dr. Love's recent research and publications examine processes of personal and organizational transformation. Her focus is on assisting individual empowerment and facilitating organizations to understand and manage for diversity. It is my great honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Love to our gathering and to introduce her to you.
Thank you. Let's see. Greetings and welcome. Let me add my welcome. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share with you today. I'm talking with you about strategies for transformation and healing. I don't know the details of the work that you do. I just know what I've read about it. I'm thrilled to get a chance to meet more of you and to hear and see some of your work. It looks enormously interesting and exciting to me, and I'm deeply interested in knowing more about how this work that we all do facilitates the healing of conflict and the transformation of conflict into healing. I'm working with someone in the booth up here to vaguely try to coordinate what's on the screen with what I'm saying. Every once in a while, I'll take a look back to see, very good, to see whether what I'm talking about is what's showing on the screen. And that may or may not work, and if it looks like what's on the screen has no relationship to what I'm talking about, somebody just wave your hand. And then I'll try and see if we can get a little more coordinated. Also, sometimes, because the subject is enormously interesting to me, I get very excited about it, and I get in the middle of a thought, and I race to the end of it. The assistance that I would like from someone is to slow me down. So is there somebody who, if I'm going too fast, would say, slow down? Sure. Thank you. All right, very good. Excellent. So, what I want to say to you is that we deserve a good world. You deserve a good world. We all deserve to live in a good world. And we have the makings of a good world. We have the makings of a good world. We have a world that has plenty of good air. We have a world that has abundant resources. There's land, actually. And there's water, actually. There's seas that are teeming with resources. And, like I said, this may or may not coordinate with what I'm saying. And we live in a time when we have a technology that's actually capable of helping us communicate with people anywhere in the world at a moment's notice and facilitating the transfer of resources from the places where they exist to the places where they are most needed. So we actually have just about everything that we need to have a world where people live well, where people live good lives. Keep going. So, what is it then that keeps us from having the world that we want? I'm proposing to you that one of the reasons might possibly be a failure in imagination. In order to have the world that we want, we first have to imagine it. We first have to have a vision about it. Yeah, that was about the trees. Because there are trees, you know there are trees that are nearly 5,000 years old that serve the purpose of making sure that we have the oxygen that we humans need to breathe. Did you know that? I find it quite extraordinary that this earth has provided just about everything that we need. Keep going. Yes, keep going. So, to have the world that we want, we have to have a vision about it. Without a vision, my people perish. Or as the Cheshire Cat said to Alice, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So, what road are we on? I keep saying that we have just about everything that we need to have the world that we want. And one of the things that we might be lacking in is a vision that we can all line up behind. My vision or your vision that we might line up behind. So I'm going to ask you to engage in an exercise with me this morning. I'm going to ask you to turn to your neighbor and tell your neighbor something about the world that you want. What is your vision of a good world? Now I'm going to walk you through this exercise. So we'll do it one step at a time. Don't turn to your neighbor and just start talking. First, make sure that you have a partner, and I'm going to give you the next step in the exercise. But everybody turn to your neighbor, to your right or to your left, and once you have your partner, I'll give you the next step. Okay, raise your hand if you do not have a partner. If you do not have a partner, raise your hand. Okay, everybody has a partner. Now, with your partner, decide who's going to be A and who's going to be B. Decide on This is good. I'll figure it out as I go along. Now, here's the deal. This is going to be a speak and listen, not a dialogue. This is not going to be a conversation. Hopefully there will be lots of time for conversation, both this morning as well as throughout the conference, but this particular exercise is not a conversation, it's not a dialogue. This is an opportunity for you to put out, both to your partner and to the universe, what you think about the world that you want. Your partner gets to look at you, listen to you, and partners, when you're listening, what I need you to do is look like you're really interested in what the person is saying. Now, if you get really excited about what they're saying, hold on to your excitement because your turn is coming. If you are frustrated or confused or you don't quite understand what your partner is saying, hold on to that because this is not for you. This is for them to get a chance to speak their vision out loud, to speak their vision to the universe. So you don't really have to understand it. They're using your aware attention as a platform from which they will speak their vision to the world. So speakers will get a chance to say, so this is my vision of the world that I want. These are the characteristics of the world that I want. Here's my set of understandings about a world characterized by peace and justice, or I'm giving you words now, you have your own words. So that's a speaker. And the listeners get to listen, look interested, and one more thing I want you to do. I want you to not only, if you can manage it, not only look interested, but look pleased and delighted. Very good. That's good. That's good. Marvelous. So it looks like you've got it. So no matter what they say, whether it matches your vision or whether it's totally contrary to your vision, I'd still like you to look pleased and delighted because the point is your partner gets a chance to speak it. Now, I said about a minute each, and I'm going to start with B. B, you're the speaker. A, you're the listener. You may begin. we will switch, and A, you're the speaker, B, you're the listener. You may begin. Okay, next time. Next time. Now, I would love it if everyone here had a chance to stand up and speak your vision out to the world. There are some laws of the universe which happen to operate independent of our belief in them, and one of them is, like the law of gravity, you know the law of gravity? You throw something up, whether you believe it's coming back down or not, it's going to come back down. So that there is this law, that if you speak your vision out to the universe will help to organize to make it happen. Some of you have had this experience, and I won't go into the details about it, but let me just ask a couple of people who will say, share with the rest of us your vision for a world free of conflict. I've got one, let me see another hand. I see two, and I see three. You're one. Yell it out so that everyone can hear you.
My vision for the world is there should be a connectivity among people and the environment. So when there is the positive connectivity, so that could create love, care, and respect for each other. So if we love, care, and respect each other as a human being, then we should also do the same thing for the environment. So there is the connectivity among all of us. So then that would create peace.
Thank you.
My vision for the world is for a place where anybody can go to anywhere in the world, not know a single soul, and know that they can knock on anybody's door, and that person will open their home to them and offer them a place to sit and eat with their family, and a place to sleep, and that parents can know that their children, no matter where they are being taken care of by the other adults that are surrounding them. So that's my vision.
All right, thank you. And who was my, yes?
It's interesting because my partner and I happen to share a similar vision, maybe because we come from the similar part of the world and we work together. But our vision is of a world where everyone is free to do whatever they want to without hurting others and without disrupting others' lives or beliefs or freedom. And a world where everyone is fearless and is free and can do whatever they want to without thinking what the consequences would be and without being scared. And I think we say it more so because we come from a part of the world where we're not necessarily that privileged, and where it's not a given that you'd be free to become an engineer, an actor, or a dancer if you wanted to. And there's a lot that goes into making decisions. So we would want for the world to be a place where you don't have to think about how you're going to do things. You just decide something and just do it.
Thank you. So, and I would love to hear more, but what we've got right now is respect and love and connectivity and collective responsibility and sharing of resources and freedom from fear, freedom from reprisals, freedom from retribution, freedom from fear, the ability to live in a world where you can do what you need to do without fear that something negative will happen to you as a consequence of you doing that or believing that or engaging in that activity and so on, as long as it is not harmful to others. So we have some understandings about what a world without conflict might look like. So why, and as many visions as there are in this room, there are many others outside this room. So what is it then that keeps our world mired in conflict? Why is it that at any day during the course of our lives, we have been able to wake up in the morning knowing that somewhere in the world there's conflict going on, knowing that somewhere in the world there is strife and discord, there's war, there's violence, and how to transform it? I'm proposing to you today that our strategies for transformation will need to be rooted in a theory of conflict, in understanding what are the sources and the origins of conflict, in a theory that helps us to understand or explain the context within which conflict happens. And that then becomes the basis for our figuring out how to transform and how to heal. Now, there's no shortage of theories of conflict and trauma and what produces it and how to solve it. The Cold War was built on a particular theory about conflict. Colonialism was built on a particular theory about conflict. The economies of the world operate on particular theories about conflict. All around the world, there are people who have these theories, presidents and prime ministers, and dictators and peasants, and warlords and warmongers, and peacemakers. And what the evidence has brought to us at this moment is that the prevailing theories have not worked. They don't work. World War I as a solution to create peace obviously didn't work. Otherwise, there would have been no World War II, and so on. The prevailing theories are not working. So what is absent and what do we need to do to change? Well, I'm going to propose a theory to you. Contrary to Stevie Wonder and his lovely lyrics, peace has deserted Zimbabwe. What do we need to get it back there? There were some marvelous ideas amongst the liberation workers and freedom fighters about how to create peace in that part of the world. What do we need to do to actually make it happen? So let me share with you some, and I'm supposed to be looking at my timekeeper. I'm doing okay? Okay, let me share with you some tenets of a theory of conflict and conflict transformation. Number one, oh, I keep forgetting to do this. Yeah, keep going. Number one, conflict and violence is caused by unhealed human hurt. On the face of it, this sounds very simple and straightforward. And I'm proposing to you that it actually is quite that simple and straightforward. That humans get hurt, and humans don't get a chance to heal, and unhealed hurt seeks to reproduce itself. This is true on the macro level, and it's true on the micro level. Because whether we're talking about institutions, communities, societies, and nation states, all of these are established, created, maintained, operated by humans. And it is the lack of healing of that human hurt that then gets reproduced on the micro level, on the macro level. It gets reproduced in the individual interactions and relationships, in communities, in nations, and it gets reproduced globally. Hurt, unhealed, reproduces itself. Now, my temptation is to go into citing lots of examples that will sway you to accepting this proposition, but I'm not going to use the time to do that. I'll ask you to scan your own memory and see whether you can see examples of it or not. But to take this notion, consider it, reflect on it, and see where it fits with your own theory about conflict and conflict transformation. The second is that humans are hurt by violence and conflict. Humans are hurt by violence and conflict. And violence and conflict takes many forms. Hurt is produced by many forms, by violence, by conflict, and violence and conflict can be understood in many ways. For instance, unmet basic needs constitutes, in my opinion, a form of conflict, a form of violence. Poverty constitutes a form of violence against humans. Oppression and injustice both constitute conflict, constitutes violence, and in and of themselves help to create, produce it, and make it happen. So humans get hurt, and when humans are hurt and they don't get a chance to heal, these consequences result from it. Now, healing the conflict. First of all, it's important to note that in healing conflict, information is not enough. Many theories operate on the assumption that if you can just get people enough information, that in and of itself will take care of the issue, that will transform the conflict. And I'm proposing to you that information is often necessary, but it is also often not sufficient to cause people to behave in different ways, to cause people to transform their behavior. I'll give you a couple of examples in this case. People can be given information that a deadly hurricane is coming and they need to get out of town. But because they are provided with that information, doesn't mean that they're going to act on it. People can be given information that smoking is harmful to your health. I'll ask you a question. How many of you know people, not yourselves, but know people who smoke? Almost every head here is raised. You know people who smoke. Now these people that you know who smoke, are these people who can't process information, or are they death-seeking people? No. Some of them are people that you love and cherish, have the greatest respect and admiration for. But nevertheless, every time they pull out this box or carton or whatever it is and decide to take out a cigarette, they're faced with a piece of information that says, this will kill you. And they still light it up. In fact, the World Health Organization says that nearly 1 billion people will die just from smoke-related diseases by the end of this century, unless people change their behavior. Information is obviously not enough. People need something more in order to change their behavior. So, what is it that people need? People need healing. Transformation and peace is possible only when the hurt produced by violence and conflict is healed. Contrary to those, let's see what the next slide shows. Yeah, healing is necessary. Let's see what the next slide shows. Oh yeah, I wanted you to look at that while I talk about this. Yes. Contrary to those who advocate a big military buildup, the stockpiling of weapons, violence would not heal violence. And violence, as it turns out, over the course of history, does not end violence. Are you with me on that? Yeah. Violence does not end violence. Without healing, healing individuals, healing communities, healing nation states, the violence will continue to reproduce itself. Trauma produced by conflict and violence, if not healed, will reproduce itself. And our claims to want peaceful means to transform conflict must be accompanied by behaviors that are consistent with this claim. I'm reminded of Huey Newton, who said to Lyndon Johnson, you're going to tell us that violence will get you nowhere while you bomb the hell out of Vietnam? In other words, these two things don't go together. Our claims must be consistent with our behavior, or our behavior must be consistent with our claims. Now let's take a look at this notion that violence takes many forms. Because it is, I'm claiming, our lack of understanding of the many forms that violence and conflict takes, and our lack of understanding of the necessity to transform these varied manifestations of conflict and violence that hinders our efforts to transform societies, to transform communities, to create peace in our world. So, I meant to go this way. Here's an example. First of all, I want to say that to understand any act of violence in the present time, we need to understand the historical antecedents. We need to understand the history in which that violence is rooted. No act of violence springs up in the moment. There's always something that precedes it that can be known and can be understood. And it is knowing and understanding that context within which it occurs that then enables us to make effective strategies for its transformation. I talked about violence happening and mirroring micro and macro levels. For instance, I mentioned Vietnam. One of the things that comes to mind is that the axe handles and the dogs that were trained on civil rights workers in Selma, Alabama, were but a mirror of the napalm, Agent Orange, and other things that were happening in Vietnam. As above, so below, on the micro, on the macro, in society globally. And so whatever you see happening with an individual, you can look around and see how is that mirrored and how is that reproduced, how is that reflected in the community, in the nation, as well as globally. I'll skip those. The genocide of Native peoples is an example of conflict and violence. This can be understood in its historical form. It also needs to be understood in its contemporary manifestations. Its contemporary manifestations are both a product of the history and also reproducing the genocide that was directed toward Native Americans. Some of you remember Andrew Jackson? No. Yes. Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was famous for the line, "The only good Indian." This was the President of the United States. This became official U.S. policy as directed toward Native Americans. Now, this policy, organized on a national level, acted out on the individual level, resulted in a range of consequences, both at the time that it was enacted, as well as in the present time. So, I think I have a slide here that's something about the Trail of Tears, or as the Native people themselves called it, Nuna Dao Usuni, the trail where they cried. And some of you have a passing knowledge of what this is about? Yes. Now, what are the ongoing consequences of this dislocation of Native peoples and the thousands and thousands and thousands who died in that process? The loss of self-determination, the loss of culture, the loss of homeland. And speaking about culture, I won't go into details, but I learned something recently that was very interesting to me. Some of you know about fry bread. Yes. Fry bread. And we describe that as part of Native culture. How many of you thought of fry bread as something that is a part of Native culture? Okay, now what I learned was that as a result of these locations that actually occurred well into the 20th century, even recently, the US government, because Native Americans were put in places where they were not able to sustain themselves, they were not able to maintain economies, they were not able to produce in ways that would allow them to sustain their families. So the US government gave them subsistence products. Some of you have heard of something called commodities. Yes? No? Okay, commodities. And so commodities generally consisted of a block of cheese, some meat with gravy products, and lard and flour. There might have been a couple of other items in it.
Corn syrup.
Corn syrup. So what Native people did was to take that lard, stir up that flour, drop that flour into that lard, and voila, you got what?
Fry bread.
You got fry bread. And because culture in the end is the way that a group of people adapt to the environment in which they find themselves, adapt themselves and their people to accommodate the circumstances which they must now accommodate, fry bread, which is about as healthy as... Yeah, we now associate as part of Native culture. But back to this point. So, let's go to the next slide. So, Native people dislocated, loss of self-determination, loss of culture, loss of land, loss of connection, because part of what happened was that people got put wherever the government decided to put them. And so loss of connection, one of the things that you talked about here. And in the present time, this shows up in a variety of ways. One, this is just one of the ways that it shows up is in something called fetal alcohol syndrome. Now, Native Americans suffer one of the highest rates of fetal alcohol syndrome. They also suffer high rates of diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, and so on. But this is just one way to track the consequences of violence and conflict on a particular group of people. 20%, almost 20% of Native American babies suffer fetal alcohol syndrome. Now, what are the consequences of that for a group of people? In my opinion, this is simply another manifestation of genocide. Historically, there it was, and in the present time, so it continues. How do you transform the situation so that this situation reverses itself? Now, there are all sorts of programs and all sorts of government-sponsored programs and so on that tries to make an intervention in this, and yet the problem persists. What I'm claiming is that until people get a chance to heal from the hurt, both historical and in the present time, contemporary trauma that's been inflicted on them, all of the programs and all of the policies and so on won't make the difference that is necessary to move these people in a different way. Other ways that violence and conflict is manifested. You would agree with me that burning a Quran or threatening to burn a Quran is a form of violence? Yes. You would agree with me. You would agree with me that the Arizona immigration law is a form of violence? Yes. Okay, you would agree with me that, let's see what's next. Alaska. Alaska has an English-only, Alaska passed an English-only initiative. I found this one particularly interesting. And this initiative was approved by 69% of the population that was voting in Alaska at the time. Now, the curious thing about Alaska's, I think I may have another, let me keep my hand pointing in the right direction. This means go back. The curious thing about Alaska Native languages is that there are 20 plus Native languages spoken in Alaska. Not only that, let's see what's next. Oh, back. Okay, there are 20 plus Native languages spoken in Alaska. Not only that, there are communities where only that native language is spoken. No English is spoken in the community at all, except when outsiders come to deliver whatever, goods, supplies, medicine, mail, etc. So how much sense does it take? I mean, how much sense does it make for such a state to have an English-only initiative? Go ahead, say none. None. Okay, thank you. None. Why would such a state pass such an initiative? Don't answer that. Okay, because why would such a state, no, don't finish that sentence. Don't even finish that sentence. Okay. My point is, hurt on an individual, a community, and a state level has to be healed there before the people in that community, before the people in that state will be able to live together in a transformed society. Now, I'm working on a theme here, and the theme might not be evident yet, but hopefully it'll become more evident as we go along. So I'm going to mention a couple of other places. Sri Lanka, off the southern tip of India, tropical island, beautiful, fabulous, everything that people need to live well and to live in harmony with each other. And at one point in their history, they did. Let's see what the next slide says. There we go. At some point in time, the island fell under the influence of the Portuguese and the Dutch, and then eventually was taken over by the British. Now, one of the things that the British did wherever they went, and they went everywhere. In fact, some of you might remember this quote, I call it famous quote from Gandhi, from the Gandhi movie, where the Viceroy, His High Muckety Muckness, says, you want Her Majesty's government on whose flag the sun never sets to just get up and walk out of India because a bunch of ragtag Indians lay down in the street. Now, the thing that caught my ear and mind was when he said, on whose flag the sun never sets. So what does that mean?
You're everywhere.
They are everywhere. From wave to wave, from sea to shining sea, they are everywhere. And everywhere they went, they employed the same strategy. The strategy that the British employed was called divide and rule. And so wherever they found people who might look a little different from each other, might speak a different language from each other, might have different kind of economies, different kind of cultural manifestations, and so on, they used as their strategy to pit one group against the other. What they did was to tell one group, you're superior, and they would find the group that looked the most like themselves. And you're the superior group, and the other group should serve you. And these divisions then were fanned and fanned and fanned, and that's what enabled them to rule. And so Sri Lanka has been caught in the midst of an extraordinarily horrific civil war, because once independence came, the seeds that had been planted by the British simply grew. People had lived under a rule that said, you're different, you're not like each other, some of you are better than others, some of you should serve others, some of you should have more than others. And so, once the British left, they didn't take that seed with them. That seed was planted, and so that seed grew. Serbia. The British only had some influence there, but other countries as well did exactly the same thing. Serbia, Afghanistan, this area of the world where people had been meeting in a crossroads of cultures and languages and ways of life over the centuries. I think it would be very important and useful and provocative for us to try to understand some of the history of violence and conflict that produces what we see happening in this area of the world today. Rwanda. Some of you have heard of Rwanda? You've heard of Rwanda? Again, exactly the same thing that happened. Interestingly enough, once Hutu and Tutsi and the Twa lived in harmony and peace. Now, this is not that commercial from ranch dressing, that shows lions and lambs frolicking through the forest. This is part of historical fact. They lived together in peace. And then, some of you know 1884, that conference in Berlin. Nobody's saying yes. Okay, Europeans met in Berlin in 1884 and decided that they would divide up the rest of the world amongst themselves. And so they parceled out territories here and there. You take this one, you take that one. I'll take those two by the gate. Never been there, don't know who's there, don't know what the land looks like, but this now belongs to us because we are meant to rule the world. And so they divided up Africa, they divided up Asia, they divided up South America, and at that conference, Germany got the land that we now call Rwanda. Now, there were these different groups of people there. They had different cultural styles. Oh, what's my time? 10:30. Who? They had different cultural styles, different ways of behaving, different sets of beliefs, and so on. And there were some differences in physical characteristics. The Germans took those differences, labeled them, classified them, and called them races, using their own thinking strategy and their own terminology, and then organized a stratified society based on their own notions about race. And they told the one group, you're most like us and you're superior and therefore you should rule. And they told the other group, you're shorter, you're darker, you are therefore a more inferior people and therefore you should serve. And they fanned the flames of division and hatred. And then the Germans left, the Belgians came in. I think there's another slide about this. The Belgians came in. No, there isn't. The Belgians came in, and they took those divisions and they put them on cards. And they say, y'all have to wear cards, because we can't really tell one from the other. Not really, but we know there is a difference. And so we're going to give you cards so that everybody, including yourselves, will know who's superior and who's inferior, and who should be serving and who should be served. And because they couldn't really tell based on physical characteristics, they decided to do it. If they could see some slight physical differences, that was okay. But in most cases, they couldn't, so they decided to do it on the basis of cattle ownership. If you own 10 cattle, you are Tutsi, and if you own fewer than 10 cattle, then you're Hutu. So if you own 10 cattle or more, you're a part of the superior group, and if you own less than 10 cattle, you're part of the inferior group, and therefore you should serve. And they fanned the flames of hatred because that helped them to rule. Independence came, the Europeans left. Did they take their seeds with them? No. And so the world had to watch what happened as a result of that. I had a couple of stories about even while the genocide was going on, Belgian troops, US troops, British troops, French troops were there and could have made a difference. And what they decided to do was to pack up their weapons and leave over and over again while thousands of people were slaughtered. Quickly, two others. Potato famine in Ireland. Now, I read about the potato famine in Ireland in my history book, and I didn't think much about it as an example of, violence and conflict. But a little more digging, in fact, I spent some time in Ireland. I got a chance to talk with some people there who pointed me to things that I ought to read so that I can understand better what it was that happened and why it shows up in the present time the way that it does. And by extension, part of what I want you to consider is this hurt unhealed, how it shows up in relationships. Now, the Irish ended up settling in Australia, they settled in Canada, they settled in Scotland, they settled in the UK, but many settled in the US. And it will be interesting, I'll make this short because it's speculation on my part, about the ways in which relationships or conflict in relationships occur in the present time because of this historical hurt that never got healed. For instance, a lot of Irish are in Arizona. A lot of Irish are in Alaska. Interesting to start looking at those connections. But part of what happened was that the English went into Ireland. I'm starting to talk fast now. English went into Ireland. They decided that these were savage, wild people. They didn't deserve to own the land. Over a course of time, they took the land, and one of the strategies that they used was starvation. They went through the land, they destroyed the crops, and they killed the people who owned the land. The land got assigned to English owners. This over a period of time, starting with Henry II, Elizabeth I. And so by the time we get to the potato famine, Irish own no land. The land is owned by British absentee landlords. The Irish are now producing export crops, not food to feed their families, and on a tiny plot, they're supposed to both produce enough food to feed their families and enough to sell so that they can pay the rent for the places where they're living to their absentee British landlords. Now the potato famine comes, there's a blight on the crops are failing, they can't pay their rent, and they cannot feed their families. At that same time, the British decided to enforce the penal laws. I think I put that up there. The penal laws. Millions died, you understand that. Millions died, millions immigrated. But, go ahead, next. Go ahead, next. Okay, the penal laws. The penal laws. It was illegal for Catholics to own land. Most of the Irish were Catholic. It was illegal for them to have an education. It was illegal for them to speak their own language. It was illegal for them to enter a profession, hold office, deal in trade, join the army, or practice their religion. So this is what was happening to the Irish. And in the end, the population of Ireland was reduced by about 4 million. And at the height of the famine, the Irish were producing food, but it was being exported because it belonged to the British landlords. So they were producing food, but they couldn't eat it because the landlords were seeking better prices. And the Irish couldn't raise enough money to buy the food to feed their families, and so they died. And they died in the millions. Now this is an historical trauma, which, if not healed, tends to reproduce itself. Let's go on. Let's go on. Uganda. I won't do the whole story about Uganda. The teeth may smile, but the heart does not forget. Some of you have some information about what happened in Uganda under Idi Amin. Again, the British, there was a series of Europeans, but the British came, divide and rule. What they saw, they in fact codified and established. They thought they saw differences, they named those differences, they codified those differences, they fanned hatred and division between people based on those understandings of differences, and when they left, the seeds that they left continued to grow. And so we know what happened under Idi Amin. Now, I'm trying to get on to the healing part because of my time. Let's don't talk about Brazil. I mean, we could talk about Brazil. In the 20th century alone, 90 indigenous tribes have been destroyed. Now, a thread here is about the ways in which seeds for conflict and trauma have been sown. Keep going. And part of it for me was understanding what's the source of that trauma, because where Europeans have gone. Now some of you, I could talk about a whole bunch of things that happened in Europe, but this is one example that for me would help you to understand it. Some of you have heard of the 30 Years' War. Just random violence across the country, destruction of people, destruction of lands, destruction of communities, and so on. This was a picture that I found, sort of a depiction of the 30 Years' War. Hurt being reproduced on a massive scale. Hurt produced on a massive scale. Hurt that, as far as I can tell, never had a chance to heal. So in a minute, I want to talk about how do we heal the hurt, but what I want you to do at the moment is just to think about what happened with you when you got hurt by violence or conflict. I'm not going to give you a chance to talk, which is what I wanted to do, but I talked myself too long, so this ends up cutting the time that you would get the chance to talk. But take 1 minute to think about when you got hurt by violence. What do you remember thinking? What do you remember feeling? What do you remember doing or wanting to do? Just take a minute and let that flash through your mind. When you got hurt and you didn't get a chance to heal, as you think of that experience of hurt, how fresh is it in your mind right now? And do you still have a visceral response to that experience of hurt? Now let's move on and talk a little bit about healing. Healing and transformation, because that is the key piece that I want to share with you. Because I want to share a particular way of thinking about healing and transformation. I'm saying that it has to be based on a particular theory about who we are as humans, so you get to think about what do you believe to be true about humans? Do you believe that we're basically good, basically bad, basically evil, tabula rasa? What set of notions do you hold about who we are as humans? Because that's going to determine your transformation efforts. What do you understand about society? What beliefs do you hold about what is appropriate in society? Humans, I'm going to let you keep thinking about humans. A couple of things about society. Just a couple of examples, and there are lots of ways to think about your sets of beliefs about societies, but one of them is to think about resources, availability of resources and distribution of resources. How do you think about collective responsibility? How do you think about how we handle and how we organize the resources that are available to us? So here's a couple of ways of thinking about it. CEOs in Japan, as I understand it, can only make 27 times the amount of wage roll workers. In other words, there's a cap on their ceiling. I mean, there's a cap on their ceiling. There's a ceiling on the amount of money they can make. In the US, CEOs can make as much as they want to. Okay? And they can sell the company and send it anywhere if they want to. And they can take all the profits out of it if they want to. And in the US, CEOs often make as much as a couple of hundred times as much as wage roll workers. Now, here's something else. Japan has the longest healthy life expectancy in the world. Wonder what connection is there. And the US ranks 24th amongst the nations of the world. In Japan, there is universal health care. In the US, people are clamoring, we got to repeal the most basic health care that finally got passed. In a nation with the resources that we have, for people to disagree about whether or not there ought to be universal health care is a form of violence and conflict. But the basic notions that you hold about society end up serving as the basis for the strategies for transformation that you will organize. So let's go on. Here's another example, the Gila River Indians. The Gila River Indians on the Gila River in Arizona found that their community was disrupted, their livelihood destroyed, their ability to feed themselves, to feed their families, and to maintain their culture and their communities was simply destroyed and taken away from them because they dammed the Gila River. So that people in Arizona could water their, Phoenix, so that people in Phoenix could water their lawns and their golf courses and would have water on which to ski. An example for me, and you can have your own sets of examples about the ways in which hurt gets experienced. Now, what notions do you hold about our responsibility toward each other, our children, etc.? I had to put this up. The amount of money that we've now spent on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I just wanted you to kind of consider what you thought you might be able to do, how many theaters you might be able to build. So just think about that. Let's keep going. Another way to think about collective responsibility, the Waltons, the Walton family fortune is about the GNP of Singapore. All right? And here's a chart about how much they give to others. Just some notions about collective responsibility and how we organize that. And in the country at the moment, the notion is about repealing the tax cuts for the wealthy, because the government ought not be taking their money away from them, is the notion being put out in many quarters. Let's keep going. So, healing and transformation. How do you transform a world? How do you transform a society? How do you transform a community? How do you create a world characterized by peace? Let's keep going. What is the vision that you have? And I'm going to ask you to keep thinking about that, and not only thinking about it and formulating it and reformulating it, but continue to tell other people. Find people to tell about your vision, even if you have to stop somebody in the street and tell them. Well, actually, you'll be on an airplane and you know how you can talk to your seat buddy. Even when they put the book over their face, you can still tell them, I want to tell you about my vision. I think people to keep telling about their vision. Okay. I was going to talk some about things that people have tried. For instance, Women in Black. Some of you are familiar with Women in Black in Israel and Belgrade. Some of you are familiar with Truth and Reconciliation, and some of the both usefulness of it, as well as many of the limitations of it. That was the whole notion about the teeth may smile, but the heart does not forget. But a useful strategy, nevertheless. Let's keep going. I'm going to propose some healing circles. I'm going to propose that you get to, and last night I understand that there was a marvelous, how many of you got a chance to see the performance last night? A marvelous example of a strategy that some young people have created for themselves as a way to deal with the pain and the trauma that they experience as a result of the communities in which they live, the availability or lack of availability of resources that support them to have the lives that they want, and they found a way to try to transform that energy, transform those feelings, and release them so that they can continue to move toward health and transformation of themselves and their communities. I propose for you healing circles. Start with me, start with you, and then help it to move outwards. So here's what I'm suggesting. That it involves a number of things. One of the things that it involves is breaking silence, telling the story, naming one's reality, describing the world as you see it, describing what you want, and how what you currently experience differs and varies from what it is that you want. Now, voice and breaking silence also depends on having an aware, caring attention available to you. It is one thing to tell a tree, and that's a good thing to do. And there are some cultures where they say, oh, dig a hole in the ground and speak it into the hole, and that has value too. I grew out of a culture, Southern Baptist, any Southern Baptists in the room? And we say, tell God all about it. I got a telephone in my bosom, and I can call him up anytime. And that has value. That has value. What I'm proposing is to speak it to someone who is right there in your face with caring, aware, loving attention that enables you to break that silence, to speak your voice, to speak about that trauma, to speak about that conflict, to speak about that experience that left hurt with you. Now, speaking paying attention accompanied by the release of the emotions, because every experience of hurt is accompanied by some experience of emotion: sadness, grief, rage, terror, anger, mourning. There are all sorts of feelings that we hold on to, we carry around with us. We carry them on our back. They manifest themselves, and the information is becoming increasingly clear that many illnesses are a result of the stressful emotions that we carry that we don't have a way to release. So hurtful on the individual level, hurtful on the community level, and so on. So, speaking, being heard, and the release of the painful emotions. Now, this will enable you to reconnect with the truth about yourself, to reconnect with the truth about your connections to all other humans. This will enable you to reconnect then to, once you release that fear about what can be done as a result of what I do or say or think or espouse, one is more empowered to act in the world toward the vision that you hold. Releasing the emotions, telling the story, taking the healing, frees up our human energy, because we have enormous energy waiting to be applied toward the transformation of the world. And so, next, reconnection, next, clarification, next, reclaiming your power, next, taking action. So what I want you to do is, that's 10:45. Okay, good. What I want you to do is to take a moment to reflect on an experience that you have had where you participated in transforming conflict. An experience that you have had of transforming conflict, and tell me what you noticed. Or tell your partner what you noticed. What did you notice about yourself as you experienced in transforming conflict? What did you notice about yourself? What did you notice about anyone else? What did you notice about the space around you? What transformations were you able to observe? And what was that like for you? And what feelings did that produce for you? So let's take the same partner, and I noticed that there were a couple of people who didn't have a partner, so I want to make sure that everybody gets a partner. So, get a partner. Everyone get a partner. Get a partner. Everyone get a partner. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner. Okay, so I have someone. Raise your hand if you don't have a partner. I'm trying to get partners to make it to each other. Another partner. I need one more partner down here. Can I have someone who doesn't have a partner? Okay. Then let me have you join this and make a three-way. So you want to have, oh. Thank you so much. Now, what I'd like you to do, decide who is A, B, and C, where there is a C. Decide where there is an A, B, and a C. Okay? And let me review the guidelines. Let me review the guidelines. 1, you get to describe your experience of transforming conflict. What was it like for you? What did you do? What happened? What do you remember thinking, feeling, saying? What transformations did you notice in yourself, in others, in the space around you? And when you're the listener, your job is to give your partner your aware, delighted, caring attention, delighted attention, to look really interested in what they're saying. Okay? Are you ready? So, again, let's start with B. B, you're the speaker. A and C, you're the listener. And you got 2 minutes, you may begin.
Oh, am I being here? All right. This summer I went to Zanzibar. There was one girl that we were working with, and we asked them to write on describing being treated differently because of who they were.
In the three-way, you should switch in the three-way. The two-way, keep going. The three-way, C may begin. The others of you keep going. You have 1 more minute.
The only thing I think of is that yesterday I stopped Arden. I've done this now. This is like the second time I've done this. I know to start arguing on something, and I said I can't take it because I'm also very happy to pick up the like stuff that was just charity. And I thought it was stupid that I went. They're both idiots. And I sat there, and they said, shut up. And one guy comes and he says, can I just ask you what you thought you'd say, disrespectful like that? And I say, well, the situation, like, the situation's building out. You're both handling it badly. I figured if I gave you a common enemy, you'd be quiet and you'd hate me instead. And he goes, oh, it's psychology. Maybe you're right. I don't know if one of them bumped the other or something. They were sort of sitting at the process.
Okay, time to switch. And A, you're now the speaker. B, you're the listener. Switch. A, you're the speaker. B, you're the listener.
Luckily, I sort of feel like because I've always been a confident counsel, so I feel like I know how I can handle it. All right, you're on. The only thing I would know is like the numerous times when 2 kids were running to me and one is
So let me see the hands of 3 people who will share what that experience was like for them, to talk about participating in transformation. 3 people? I have 1, 2, and I'll have 1 more. 3. Okay, where was my 1? Yes. And stand up and yell it out so that everyone can hear you.
Okay. As a performing artist, I do this all the time, as a matter of fact. I'm from Oklahoma. Tulsa, Oklahoma is where I live. And in Tulsa was one of the worst terrorist acts in the country. The 1921 race massacre actually occurred there. They called it a riot, which creates conflict. And it cannot be resolved because it was not one race fighting themselves. It was people coming into their community and burning them out, 36 blocks of terror in a matter of less than 24 hours time. So I have a one-woman show called Big Mama Speaks. And Big Mama's in the first person's voice, and she is about 90-something years old, a survivor. And she retells her memory of what happened in a very familiar setting. And I was just telling them the retelling of her story to people that understand that hurt. Once that hurt is heard and it's out in front of us, it's on the table for us all to eat from and look at, something happens in the audience. Whether you're young or old, something happens where people feel like there is an understanding. And in that body of understanding, transformation happens for the person that feels like they have been heard. What happens to me as an actor is that since I have to take so much in and ingest so much and then regurgitate that out, is that I'm constantly in a transformational state. I equate it with the rotation of the earth, is that it's cyclical. So it keeps, if I can get into what has hurt me as the individual person in my life as a woman, as an African American, Native American woman, if I can identify with the little things that hurt me, on just me, the little person, it's the same thing that hurts another human being. It's the same underlying hurt. It's the same thing that hurts another human being, and then we can go around and around and around.
Thank you. Thank you. And who was two? Pass the mic just back there.
Hi, I'm sort of in the middle of trying to do some work in addressing conflict. For the last 9 years I've taught at an historically black university, West Virginia State University. And the university has a tremendous and glorious heritage. It was one of the first places where the Tuskegee Airmen were trained. Booker T. Washington was the first graduation speaker. Leon Sullivan was a part of that school. And when Brown versus Board of Education passed, the school was one of the first schools to integrate. And it has really, I mean, I feel kind of strange saying this as a white woman, but it really has been kind of overtaken by white students and people and white sensibilities. And I'm trying very hard to use theater as a transformational tool. That's another long, agonizing story that I don't need to talk about. But finally, last year I was able to do the first production we did, Carlo Brown's African Company, Prince Richard III. Right now we're working on The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, for those of you who know that play. And it has opened some wonderful conversations between black and white students, because I have learned that there's such a divide between, just in generalizing, that there's such a divide between the white campus and the black campus. And I think that's so unfortunate. So I haven't transformed anything yet, but I'm hoping to.
And what was it like for you to talk about this process, about what you've been doing? What was it like for you?
You know, it's wonderful, because it may be just a horrible disaster, but I think, and God knows it could be, but I think theater has a place here. I see it as a tool to get all of my students, whom I love, to talk about things and to provide, rather than just sitting down and say, well, you talk about what hurts you and you talk about what hurts you. We have a framework of the play. I don't know, it feels very healing for me, and I feel very, and that's selfish. But I really hope to help the spiritual integration of the school.
Thank you. And number 3, who was 3? Just here.
Hi, so I was teaching street theater in Pakistan to university students. It's funny because most of them were actually older to me, and for them, and they were mostly men, so for them it was always like, man, how
I'm
are
actually
you?"
going to interrupt you and ask you not to tell what you've been doing, but what was it like for you to talk about this experience?
So when we were doing street theater, and the only reason I had to mention the background was because we're talking about Pakistan, we're talking about, well, I'm not saying we're very conservative, but a lot of ideas like homosexuality and religion, like a lot of people don't challenge because they don't know it any other way, not because they're extremists, but because they've never known it any other way. And so we were working on issues like, and a lot of times we had to sit down with students. We're doing, talking about homosexuality and religion and how it was okay to accept people of other identities, of other religions, of other sexualities. And and it was a struggle because they actually thought these were crazy ideas and they couldn't relate to those. But gradually, when we started doing street theater, we actually ended up performing in like smaller parts of the city. And like later on, these kids would tell me that that like we've understood and we're developing and we accept and we like it was actually more transformation for me because I felt like I was growing with them. And like the conflicts that they had were almost like a battle for me within. And when I saw them, coming out or accepting these things that they were alien to before, like I almost felt like I was transforming in so many ways and I was growing in so many ways. And then because we were doing street theater, like all the audiences, the people who would actually stand there start laughing when we were talking about like how the Sharia or religious issues, like they'd actually shush others around them and just be like, be quiet, like let us watch the performance. And so it was more, I just feel like I'm not sure if we've made too much of a contribution to the people around us, but I feel like as an individual I have by teaching or by directing street theater transformed so much myself.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, I'd love to hear from other people, but I would direct your attention to thinking about what was the experience like for you. The claim that I'm making is that transformation begins here. And we're a group of people, as I understand who's in this room, who do so much for others and who organize and coordinate and plan and put forth programs for others. And I'm encouraging you to also focus on the transformation here and increasingly include the transformation that occurs for you as the space and basis and platform from which you support, encourage, facilitate transformation from others. So in the end, it's about healing, it's about breaking silence, it's about having a voice, it's about the release of the painful emotions as a space from which to clarify, reconnect, and decide what to do, how to act in the world. Thank you so much for your attention this morning. Have time for maybe two questions? 1, 2, A, B. Yes.
First of all, thank you. I actually am from and currently am living in Arizona, and I was thinking about what you were saying in terms of healing, and it was ironic that you mentioned that there may be some connections between historical trauma in Europe and Ireland and what's going on. I don't know how to, I've been involved in healing groups within the communities that are being persecuted. I don't know how to approach the community that's perpetrating that and say, I think you may have some healing to do. So I was wondering if you, and I think that's a big question and I know, but I was wondering if you have some thoughts or observations on that.
Yeah. And you've captured a key point, you captured a key point for me, is that as much work as we do with the people who are targeted by oppression, violence, conflict, etc., until we do similar work with the people who are doing the targeting, it will simply recycle, recycle, recycle. I talk about, and I'll get back to your question, I have one short answer, not a full answer, but I think about, for instance, oppression. If you think of oppression as a table, or poverty or conflict or violence, as a table that rests on two legs. And one leg represents the people who are targeted, harmed, hurt, victimized, etc. by it, and the other leg represents the people who are the targeters, the oppressors, the people who are doing, who are inflicting the hurt. And where do we put most of our attention? We put most of our attention here, and we very seldom put any of our attention here. And part of the transformation will occur when we're able to put more and more of our attention here. Now, how to approach those who are the aggressors, those who are in the role of oppressor, and I very specifically and deliberately say in the role of oppressor because, back to this notion about who we are as humans, I don't call them oppressors because that misidentifies who they are with what they have been doing. It's a misidentification of their behavior with the human being themselves. And if we understand that a role is something that you took on, then it's something that you can take off. But if it's something that is a part of your character, then we're up against a whole different ball of wax. So I talk about people who are in the role of oppressor, in the role of aggressor, in the role of dominant and subordinate and so on. So if we understand that these are beloved human beings who then act out these behaviors, one, it's a different approach to invite them to a conversation. Now, and sometimes the invitation is that straightforward. The invitation is that simple. I'd like to invite you to a conversation. I'd like you to invite you to consider the ways in which you have been hurt that led you to behave in this way. Sometimes it's a straightforward invitation, and made easier by a transformed notion about who it is that you're speaking to. It's really hard for me to try to sit down to the table with a racist. It's a lot easier for me to sit down to the table with the beloved person who is white, who has been pushed into the role of enacting racist oppression. Do you see what I mean? So one is a transformation that starts here that you are then able to extend to others. And there are still some people that I probably would have a hard time inviting to the table. I'm going to do a lot more transformation before I can talk to you. But I have to hold out that that is a possibility. We just have 5 more minutes, so who was my number 2? Yes.
What are our expectations in trying to do healing amidst the conflict that does not stop, and amidst inequalities and inequities? What are our expectations of the healing when the realities around those who we're trying to work with on healing are not only not improving, perhaps getting worse?
Excellent question. And let's put that question in the historical context. I mentioned the 30 Years' War for that reason. Because unless we assume, unless we make an assumption and hold out an expectation that we can have an effect and that we can facilitate the transformation toward the ending of conflict, oppression, etc., then history has shown us that it actually will in fact continue. And so I hold as my evidence my dearly beloved, main, best love, somebody know who I'm talking about. You don't know me, so you don't know. Barack Obama. Okay. Now, let me talk about Barack Obama. How many of you, be honest with me, before the last year of the campaign, thought that in 2010 we'd have a black president of the United States of America? Be honest. Most of us said, oh yeah, we want to have a black president. Most of us said, yeah, it should happen. And most of us said, yeah, it will happen, but probably not in my lifetime. Okay? Most of us thought it could happen, but somewhere down the road. It will happen, but somewhere down the road. Now, aren't you glad that he didn't organize what he was doing on the basis of what I thought was possible? On the basis of what I thought was realistic. Are you with me? In other words, what seems realistic, what seems possible, should not be our vision. Our vision is going to have to go way above and beyond what we think is possible and what we think is realistic. And so I appreciate and honor the huge dilemma that you hold out for us in the midst of difficulty, in the midst of conflict, in the midst of violence, in the midst of oppression, in the midst of whatever. How do we hold out an expectation that we can in fact be bigger, better, beyond that, that we can in fact transform and we can in fact heal? And I'm saying that it starts with your vision, it starts with your own transformation, and it starts with your then organizing on the basis of your vision, not on the basis of the false reality that is presented by oppression. Capitalism is a false reality. Most people don't know that capitalism has already collapsed, for instance, and so on. So we present it with the false notion of what is actually real, and when we organize our behavior on the basis of what appears to be real, we miss the possibilities of our vision. And thank you so much for your question. My time is up. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Barbara. Thank you so much. What a great way to set us off this weekend. I want to just gather some threads for a moment before releasing us on our break. Last night we saw, both in the documentary and in Buck World 1, examples of theater that is being used to heal, not just to heal communities, but to actually generate healing among the community of performers, and then share that healing with a community of audience in various parts of the world. And then this morning, Dr. Love has given us some examples of ways that this can specifically happen within our own work to heal ourselves, and then ways that we can take that into other communities and other works to generate healing, and a particular model for doing that, which has to do with first expressing the hurt, and then recognizing how the hurt might possibly be reproduced if we're not aware of the ways in which we've been hurt. So thank you. This is exactly what we needed to begin the conversation today, learning from each other, sharing with each other, and understanding more about what we're doing and learning how to do it better. So today, the rest of the day, we're operating on flexible time, which is a good thing, and we're just about 15 minutes, which is not so bad, in an advanced direction. So we're about to break for 10 minutes, and really please keep it as if you don't need to leave the room, thank you, and if you do, keep it quick. Joan will be out front to collect your lunch. Orders, if you want, $10 exact change would be appreciated. And we come back for the panel, Aftermath, Human Rights and Recovery. Thank you so much. See you in 10 minutes.